Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran.
Hello and welcome to Israel Update. It's been 312 days since this war began. It's the 13th of August. It's a Tuesday. I'm Gadi in Tel Aviv, and at the Hudson Institute is, you'd be surprised to learn, no other than senior fellow Mike Duran. Hello, Mike.
Hi, how are you? Welcome back.
Yeah, I came back after almost 10 days or something. And when I go, I need a cat sitter because I have cats, and I found a stash of mineral water bottles, the water that you buy in a store, which is a surprise to me because I have a water minibar, so you can get clear, healthy water from the bar. And then I realized that people were hoarding stuff that they thought they may need in case of a massive Hezbollah attack. And then I went to an electricity store. I had to buy some device, and people are buying power generators, LED lights that last long, and yet the atmosphere is calm. So on the one hand, people are tense and getting ready and taking this seriously. And on the other hand, life seems to go on.
My favorite thing on Twitter that I saw while you were away was Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, tweeted in Hebrew about the impending attack by Hezbollah on Israel. He said, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. And some Israeli guy, just a random dude, he tweeted, "This sounds like my wife when I ask her for sex."
I saw there a whole lot of cartoons mocking Nasrallah and Khamenei. There was one of Khamenei lighting a fuse attached to a rocket, but the fuse is like on two huge, barrels around which you have 3 miles of wire. But that doesn't mean that the war wouldn't start. Let me just remind you that before I went, we were saying, what if God is going to be on vacation and the war will begin, what shall we do? And I said, I don't think it would begin in a week. And apparently I was right.
You were right. You were absolutely right.
But I would not know how to explain why. Just an intuitive sense. I guess that in a way, when you live in this region, you learn to distinguish the tones of Arab threats and how they sound differently when they're serious. I think the Iranians are, and we'll get to the geopolitics after the news bulletin, but I think the Iranians find themselves in a difficult bind. I don't think they're hoping for an all-out war, and they can't just not do anything. So, but we'll talk about that right after the news. I also want to mention, before we go to the news bulletin, that this show now has a producer, and his name is Jacob Wilner, and we're grateful. Yaakov. Oh, in Hebrew.
Yeah.
It's Jacob in the documents that I'm getting from him. So welcome, Jacob, and thank you for your help.
Welcome,
Yaakov. Can I say it in Hebrew? Yaakov Toda. So, yeah. Mike.
He knows Hebrew.
What's on the news?
What's on the news? Okay, so we won't try to recap everything that happened while you were away, and we'll just start from today. So amid anticipation of an Iranian and Hezbollah attack, the anticipation is still there. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said in a televised statement yesterday evening, quote, "We take our enemies' declarations and statements seriously. As such, we are primed at peak readiness on offense and defense." By the way, Gadi, I think that actually means something on offense and defense. More on that later. And we will act in keeping with the political echelon's instructions. Hagari's statement was the latest in a series of recent public statements by Israeli officials and also by American officials saying that Iran and Hezbollah are going to attack. Yediot Achronot's military affairs correspondent Yossi Yehoshua quotes this morning an unnamed high-ranking IDF officer as saying, quote, "If Nasrallah makes a mistake and responds disproportionately, That will be an opportunity for us to launch an attack that will lead to a new reality along the northern border, unquote. Regarding Iran, the same officer said, Iran understands that this time, as opposed to the response on the night of drones, we will respond differently if we are attacked. That is the reason why Tehran officials have been carefully contemplating their response to Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran, which has been attributed to Israel. They saw what we did in Yemen, and they understand the kind of damage we can cause to their economy, unquote. Ahead of a summit in Qatar on Thursday regarding a prisoner hostage deal, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will arrive in the Middle East tomorrow. Regarding a possible ceasefire hostage prisoner deal, a high-ranking IDF officer said, quote, even if high-ranking officers think differently from the prime minister in the context of the negotiations over a deal, Netanyahu's position actually does stem from germane considerations. This is an answer, of course, Gadi, to the protesters who are saying that Netanyahu is just trying to hold on to his seat and he's dragging his feet in the negotiations. The 2 points that Netanyahu was really sticking to is that Israel should continue to control the Philadelphia corridor and also the Netzarim corridor. The Philadelphia corridor being the corridor between Gaza and Egypt, the Netzarim corridor being the one that bisects the Gaza Strip from north to south. Fitch Ratings announced last night that it has lowered Israel's credit rating from an A+ to an A, and it gave Israel a negative outlook. The credit rating agency explained the decision by citing the ongoing war amid concerns that it might expand further into further fronts. It might cause infrastructure damage and also increased defense expenditure. Fitch also cited its concerns about the Israeli government's ability to make critical economic decisions. Defense Minister Galant and Prime Minister Netanyahu traded barbs yesterday after Galant implicitly criticized Netanyahu at a meeting of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Galant dismissed talk about total victory. This is a phrase that is associated with Netanyahu. He dismissed total victory as quote unquote nonsense, and he insinuated that the current poor situation on the Lebanese front is a result of Netanyahu's refusal to endorse his proposal last October to carry out a massive strike on Hezbollah. Finally, Gadi, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu clashed with his far-right coalition partner, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, over who has the right to set the policy on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. That's the place that's known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif. Ben-Gvir this morning made a visit to the Temple Mount, asserted that and he suggested that the status quo, which has governed the site since 1967, according to which Jews can visit there but not pray, no longer exists. Prime Minister Netanyahu put out a statement saying that only he and he alone, or the head of the government, which is, of course, Netanyahu, sets the policy on the Temple Mount, and it hasn't changed. Over to you, Gadi.
Yeah, so I'd like to first comment on Galant, because what is going on with the Minister of Security, Galant, is not a singular incident. It's a brewing disagreement, and Galant is always trying to reframe it with himself as hawkish on some of the issues. But the real issue is that Galant is pushing to abandon the Philadelphia corridor in a deal for the hostages, and Netanyahu has vetoed this completely. When you listen to what Galant is saying, it's, I have to tell you, Mike, absolutely ridiculous. He says we will have sensors there, and that the Egyptians didn't smuggle anything overground. It was all underground, and the attack on October 7 happened also overground, and nobody yet beat the Slurry Wall, which is the construction, the underground construction that Israel has built. So people are here listening to this, and I think he's making a political miscalculation. But what Israelis are hearing is a minister of defense of October 6. We have technology, we'll have sensors, we'll have this underground Slurry Wall, and everything will be fine if we now leave Gaza. By the way, including without total victory, which he mocked as beating the tam-tam drums, and as you said, nonsense. I think he's making the same miscalculation that Gantz and Eisenkot have made before him, misunderstanding the fact that the Israeli public is generally sober, realistic, and moderate, and it understands that leaving Hamas on its feet in Gaza and leaving the Philadelphia corridor means that we did not win this war and that this is a mortal danger to the whole of Israel. So Galant is now, and let me just throw in one more thing. Galant is the man who defeated the reform that the coalition he was part of made its flagship policy almost 2 years ago. So Galant surrendered to the refuseniks in the IDF when he, instead of quashing the rebellion against the reform, the rebellion of the reservists, Mike, you'll stop me if this gets too complicated, but you'll remember that there was a rebellion in the army basically saying we will not serve in a dictatorship, and therefore if the reform is not stopped, then the IDF will be torn apart. The Minister of Defense, Galant, rather than quashing the rebellion outright as a mutiny in the army, went to speak to them, and in the end, he was the one that carried their threat into politics and said that as Minister of Defense, he demands that the reform be stopped. So this guy is a constant Trojan horse on the right in Israel, and now also challenging the prime minister on the first goal of the war. So when he understood what happened, and I'll finish with that and let you respond, he gave out a statement, which was, I think, ridiculous, in which he said, I still stand behind all the goals defined for this war. So what do you mean exactly if you're saying that total victory is nonsense, but the goals of the war, which include total victory over Hamas, I don't know how to explain otherwise, dismantling Hamas's military and civil capabilities, how can the two things be reconciled?
So let me add two things to what you're saying, just footnotes. One is just to round it out for our viewers and listeners. As you explained to us in a previous episode, Galant, when he came out back, I'm talking about back during the judicial reform, when he came out in favor of stopping the reform, Netanyahu fired him, but then was forced to bring him back. And so in Netanyahu,
by riots in the streets and threats in the army and whatnot.
And he was, so this was his greatest moment of political popularity. And so, as you explained to us before, he's trying to relive that moment again and trying to find it where he can become an independent political actor with his own support, with his own base. But there's another dimension to it here, and that's the American dimension. The idea of giving up the Philadelphia corridor is not just that there's a political dimension behind this. I mean, an international political dimension. It's not just that there's going to be a smart fence and smart sensors that Israel is going to use to make sure there are no more tunnels. There's also going to be, the question is, who's going to be on the other side of the wall, of the smart wall? And what the Americans want is a Palestinian Authority representative. And so this is the thin end of the wedge by which they bring back revitalized Palestinian Authority, two-state solution, and so on. Netanyahu, my understanding is Netanyahu does not want a Palestinian flag flying on the other side of the wall, and this is actually quite a significant thing. It's one of the sticking points with Hamas, but it's also a sticking point between Galant and the security establishment and Netanyahu. And so what Galant is doing here with these statements is he is setting himself up as the gatekeeper between the security establishment and Netanyahu, or better yet, the conduit by which the Americans talk to the Israelis about the future of Gaza. And these days, relations between Secretary Blinken, who's on his way to Israel, and other American officials and the Israelis are pretty strained, but the mill-to-mill relationship remains very good.
Military to military. Yeah.
The military to military remains very good, and a lot of the key communications going on between Israel and the United States are being run through military channels, and so Galant is positioning himself there kind of as the Americans. It's wrong to say the Americans' man, but the guy who's more sympathetic to the Americans. It's not. There's a cleverness to this move, I think.
So just two comments in the margins of what you said. One is I don't think it's clever because we've seen Gantz and Eisenkot go down that road, and he's going to win a lot of popularity with the Americans. And the more he does, the less Israelis will support him. And secondly, if I can say less kindly, Galant is one of those. It's a mistake usually to post an ex-general as a minister of security. We keep making that mistake, and then instead of having the military subordinate to the government, the military has a representative in the government in the form of a minister of defense, and that has also a sociological element, not just a professional element. And lastly, Galant, specifically like Gantz before him, is always also a bit of the head of the union of professional generals. And these people always take care of what this is a catchphrase in Israel, pensia taktivit, a budget pension. That means that you have a permanent pension in the state budget that is not dependent on what you did or what you will do, and it's a heavy burden on our security budget. So people are also grumbling when they see a minister of defense that is serving as the head of the union of the army rather than as the representative of the citizens to impose discipline on the army. Okay.
I thought the one last thing here. I thought that quote was in the news that I gave was interesting, where an anonymous but senior IDF officer said, Netanyahu. Basically, he said, I don't necessarily agree with all of Netanyahu's calculations, but they're very serious calculations. So it's not they're serious national security calculations. They're not simply political calculations. It's the first time I've seen.
Are you noticing that Netanyahu is going up in the polls?
Oh yeah, he's going way up. Yeah, as we predicted here, Gantz is melting in the summer heat. It's a little hotter than usual in in Israel, and the National Unity Party is melting.
Yeah, and now you have to explain that joke, Mike, because
you can explain it. You can explain it.
It's the Israeli meteorologists all through August always say that it's hotter than the usual for the season. They're not getting that this is the season. It's exactly like when you call some service and they say that waiting time is longer than usual. The usual is long. The usual is hot. That's how it is in Israel. All right. So are we going to have a war or not, Mike?
I have been certain. I've never been as confused as I am now, or as uncertain of my own judgments. Let's put it that way. I have been certain that we are going to have a war, and a pretty serious one. I mean, what are the choices? The choices are Iran and Hezbollah back down. Not impossible. Not impossible. You know, the Israelis, we're told, Israelis together with the Americans killed Imad Mognia back when, what was that, 2008? I forgot even when it was, in Damascus, who the former chief of staff of Hezbollah before Fuad Shukr, and there was never Hezbollah never responded to that. So there are precedents for Israel carrying out very significant strikes against Hezbollah, and it doesn't respond. But this 1-2 of Shukr and actually Mohammed Def in it's 1-2-3 or 1-2-3-4. The attack in Hudaydah, Mohammed Def in Gaza, Fuad Shukr in Beirut, Hania in Tehran. That's a blow to Tehran's status. I feel like they have to do something. I really don't see how they cannot respond. But as you suggested in your opening remarks, they're in a dilemma. The Israelis the attack on Hudaydah was a message to Tehran that we're going to take out your oil infrastructure. We're going to shut down your oil export capabilities. We have the capabilities. We will do it. I think the Israelis are signaling that very strongly. And as you suggested, that puts the Iranians in a dilemma. On the one hand, they have to be the tough guys that they claim to be. On the other hand, they don't want to lose what they're inevitably going to lose if they do that. And the same thing is true of Hezbollah. I think Hezbollah has some real serious advantages over Israel, greater advantages than Iran does in terms of a capability to exact a horrendous punishment from the Israelis, including from the civilian population. But the impression I get is that the IDF is itching to go. As that, again, the quote that I cited in the news. They want to change the reality. They want to change the balance on the northern border. The balance is intolerable to the Israelis, intolerable to the IDF, intolerable to the Israeli political echelon. And
also, as we've been saying on this show from the beginning of the war, the north is evacuated. People cannot come back to their home. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. This is a huge pressure group in Israel. It's also a blow to Zionism and a blow to the national morale that a large portion of our land is basically under virtual occupation from afar.
So the big play, how do they square the circle then? Both Hezbollah and Iran, they both, on the one hand, their honor, and I don't mean that in any kind of superficial way. Their status, their power depends on showing that they can stand up to Israel. But if they do, they're going to pay a huge price. So how do they square the circle? Well, their answer has been so far in the war, the Americans. And they're appealing to the Americans to restrain the Israelis. But the Israelis are doing their best to send a signal to Tehran and Beirut. You cannot rely on that. We are going to go. And if think about this, Gadi, the Ukrainians just attacked Russia directly. The best information that we have is that they did not get permission from Washington to do that. They just did it. If you're sitting there in Tehran watching that, it's got to make you nervous because, there's a lame duck president in Washington. Netanyahu went to Washington. He came back and he killed Hania, or he gave the go-ahead to kill Hania and Fuad Shukr. You've got to see that the Americans are not very good at restraining the Israelis these days.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what the nightmare scenario is for me, and it's going to sound difficult because it seems on its face to be a good thing. So to the extent that peace is a good thing, the nightmare scenario, I think, is that the Americans will amass here enough deterrence to stop any attack by Iran or Hezbollah, and then force or attempt to force a hostage deal that will close down this war and save Hezbollah from destruction, and then will take us into a situation where Israel has lost this war, basically. So it sounds bad. It's not like I'm drumming for a regional war, but I don't think that we can emerge from this debacle with something like October 6 minus our deterrence. That is intolerable for Israel, and I think that in the long run we will have to fight against the noose that Iran is tying around our necks, and this may well be the opportunity. By this, I don't mean this week, this month, or the next 6 months, but there is a war brewing with Hezbollah that we have to fight, and we have to break Iran's drive to hegemony. So the worst thing that can happen is that the Biden administration would somehow get its bearings enough in order to deter, stand down, make Hezbollah and Iran stand down, and then try to and then impose some end to this war that would leave us bleeding in the water.
Well, I think that's certainly their goal. Their goal being the goal of the Biden administration, and that's why Antony Blinken is coming to the region tomorrow. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw a news report somewhere that Amos Hochstein is going to Lebanon. I could be wrong about that, but I think they've done that. They've sent both of them out, and they're in the hopes that Iran and Hezbollah will not attack while these negotiations are going on, high-level negotiations by the Americans, and they hope to pull a rabbit out of the hat and get a deal between Sinwar and the Israeli government on Thursday in Qatar, and that will give the American thinking is going to be that will give Tehran and Beirut a ladder on which to climb down from their promised attack on Israel. They'll say, no, for the people, the benefit of the people of Gaza, we have decided not to destroy Israel today. We're going to wait a little while because it's better for the people of Gaza, whom we care so much about. And that'll be their face-saving device. Whether that'll happen, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm sure you're right. That's the plan for Thursday in Doha.
So next on our agenda, what is it?
Next on our agenda, I think, is to talk about your article in
and your article.
Yes. And did I write an article?
Yeah, you wrote an article. Yeah, I forgot to mention that to you.
You see how I did that?
I brought
up your article, so you'll bring up my article. So let's start with your article.
Let's start with yours.
No, yours.
No. I'll tell you why, because I want to go back to your article with John Casapolo about the military, so we can connect the threads. And as we were talking before, we mentioned this article in our pre-recording conversation. So let our listeners know too.
Oh, okay. So anyway, I wrote an article in Tablet magazine about the sanctions that the Biden administration is imposing on Israel, supposedly because there's been a spike in violence in Judea and Samaria by settlers. Right-wing settlers are attacking Palestinians, and then there's a spike, and that has forced the hand of the Biden administration, more in sadness than anger. The Biden administration has been forced to put sanctions on its ally Israel in order to stop this spike of West Bank violence. But this is a cover story. It's not true. What happened actually, Gadi, is that the Biden administration responded to October 7th with fear, not fear that there was going to be a war between Israel and Hezbollah, or not just, but fear that the right wing in Israel was going to benefit politically from this war. And so it developed a set of policies to counter the right wing, not just to counter the right wing, but also to, it's funny, Hebrew just popped into my head, lishabesh. How do you say lishabesh? To complicate, I've lost your sound.
It's the sabotage, I think.
The sabotage the Netanyahu government, focusing on the coalition between Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and Netanyahu on the one hand, and Netanyahu on the other, to drive a wedge. They came up with a whole set of they got together. They came up with a set of policies, including revitalized Palestinian Authority, two-state solution, and all of that. That's designed to put pressure, to create tension between Ben Gvir and Smotrich on the one hand and Netanyahu, but also all this West Bank violence stuff. And they put these sanctions out.
We have to say a lot of it invented. The settler violence thing, we've talked about it repeatedly. Yeah. A lot of it is just bogus. Yeah.
There is some violence by settlers against there's always tension there between settlers and Palestinians, but the Americans are using bogus numbers by very, very politicized NGOs who, a Palestinian will attack a settler and a settler will defend himself, and they
peg it as settler violence.
They peg that as settler violence. So yeah. No, it's just like, there's crime in cities. These are people. There's friction between people, but there's no spike here. They made it up, and they have put together a machine, Gadi, to create sanctions on Israel, and they want to churn out about one package of sanctions a month in order to keep it in the headlines and to keep suggesting that this is the most horrendous right-wing extremist government ever, and that the future of of peace and security in the Middle East cannot move forward because this is such an extreme government. And this, in short, it's an information operation. And as a result, we have, for the first time in history, as far as I know, the United States has created a mechanism to generate with regularity sanctions against an ally. The United States has sanctioned allies before, but it's always over a specific real conflict, not just as part of an information operation political move.
Yeah, so there's something in this that is, first of all, the article is very important because people here are not realizing how deep the Biden administration's fingers are inside our politics, and they still think of the Biden administration, or some of them do, or a lot in the press do, as a friendly administration. And the sanctions machine is not just a hostile move against an ally, it's also a subversion of Israel's sovereignty, and Israel should take countermeasures, and it hasn't yet. For example, I don't know if you in the United States realized what it means to be sanctioned by America. Suddenly you don't have a bank account, you don't have a credit card, you can't, there's nowhere to deliver your salary, you're suddenly locked outside of society. And if Israel had, I think, behaved more like a sovereign state and less like a vassal state, it would threaten its own banks not to implement American sanctions. This is unthinkable. There is a bank in Israel that is depriving an Israeli citizen of his or her rights, and with no reaction from the state. The state should say, if you're afraid of not doing business in America because of these sanctions, you'll not be able to do business in Israel if you implement a foreign government's sanction. And with all due respect, it's a friendly government, it's an ally, it's a foreign government, and it's bypassing Israel's sovereignty. Let me remind you also, and our listeners, Mike, that for a while they were contemplating sanctions against a unit in the army, as if the army has no chain of command, as if the Biden administration can reach inside the IDF and grab from under the IDF commanders one unit and single it for sanctions. This is unthinkable. And in the end, the blowback was serious enough for them to pull this back.
Let me make a point here. That's the Netzach Yehuda. Oh wait, how do you say it? Netzach Yehuda?
Netzach Yehuda. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I put the accent on the wrong syllable. This is a result of the sanctions machine. So one of the things they do, remember, this is an information operation. It's a campaign more than it is an actual set of pragmatic measures designed to get a specific outcome. So the Netzach Yehuda sanctions were proposed to Secretary Blinken, and Secretary Blinken rejected them. Also, the sanctions machine also proposed sanctions on Ben Gvir, National Security Minister Ben Gvir, who went to the Temple Mount this morning, and that went all the way to Biden, who rejected it. Now, the thing is, this all got reported, and who when they want to leak it to the press so that it gets reported, who's their go-to guy?
Barak Ravid.
Barak Ravid, right? Barak Ravid, who is the journalistic representative of the Biden administration to the Israeli left, right? I mean,
the Biden administration, which also gives him journalism prizes.
Yeah, that's right.
It's always a good idea to get prizes from the people you're supposed to be reporting on.
Right. So they leak it to Barak Ravid, and they get the informational effect that they want, even though they haven't put the sanctions in place. It also creates, I mean, it got reported, this Netzach Yehuda stuff, as if there's a group there's a group of people in the State Department who are very concerned about what's happening on the West Bank, and they're going to Secretary Blinken and pounding on his desk and saying, we have to do this. National security requires it. So what they did, in effect, Gadi, is they created a lobby inside their own administration to lobby for this all the time, and then to generate the headlines. It's all manufactured.
And here's a tidbit about this lobby. Ilan Goldenberg is a former Israeli who worked under Obama on Iran issues, and so you can guess, Mike. I guess this is not news to you, that he's not exactly an Iran hawk, but he is also one of the people, as your article mentions, behind this mechanism of sanctions, indeed an enthusiastic promoter of this idea. And the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, has just chosen him for the point man to the Jewish community, doubtlessly one of the smartest moves of recent times. And maybe that's just a signal that this campaign, and we should talk about it in one of our next episodes, because now there's also a VP candidate, that they are not gearing their campaign to court the Jewish vote. I'm putting it very, very carefully here, but they are. Kamala Harris is not friendly to Israel by any means, but the moves that they are making make them seem like they are in love with Ilhan Omar and are not going to mind the interests or the feelings of Jewish voters in the United States.
Well, Zionist voters. I mean, Goldenberg, by the way, I can't, it's funny, you know that, do you remember that song from the 60s, Golden Brown? I can't sing it. Yeah, whenever I hear Goldenberg, I hear that song, Golden Brown. anyway,
after we're done, I'll send you a Meir Ariel song called Sdot Goldberg.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Meir Ariel is amazing.
The Goldberg Fields.
Or a Hebrew lover like
Fields,
you.
Fields of Goldberg.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, he was born in Jerusalem, apparently a Hebrew speaker. I didn't know that. I read that in the paper yesterday.
He had Israeli citizenship and he gave it up to work for the State Department or for the Obama administration.
You know, Amos Hochstein, same thing. They put a Jewish face on all of these policies. They're very good at it. They're very, very good at it. And it's time that your people wised up to how they're being manipulated. Okay, wise up.
Yeah. I think this manipulation is like one step too far, and especially on the background of what's happening in American universities. I think this was the alarm bell that woke many Jews up, because it's nice to be on the side of J Street and believe that you're progressive and have heartfelt ideology, orations about the suffering in Gaza, but it's quite another thing when your Jewish son cannot enter the library because of Hamas supporters. So I think that maybe there's some change, and maybe progressive Jews in America are beginning to feel that they're not going to be exempt from the anti-Semitic winter that we are experiencing.
How much do you trust your spidey senses on this issue? When I was younger, I was liberal, but my father was a right-wing nut. So I had a great, I think I had a great understanding, a sort of gut level, fingertip, whatever you want to call it, understanding of sentiment, because I was aware of how right-wing, very much aware in my head about how right-wing people thought. But I was among left-wing people, and so I could always sense where the line was and who had the moral high ground and who didn't. But since I've migrated to become more and more like my father as I've gotten older, I've lost my understanding of people on the left, of when they realize that they're actually losing the moral high ground.
I can't say that I have a fingertip understanding of American Jewish leftists, so this is just an educated guess, but I do have a very solid intuition of what's going on in the Israeli left, which is going to lead us to my article in a minute. But I know how to sense in Israel when they are hysterical. And that's not just because that's not a good word, because the tantrum looks hysterical. I can smell their fear. I can smell their sweat. So
well, you got it right. I mean, you called it right all on this show all along about where Gantz had it wrong, how the Americans had it wrong in playing Gantz, and as you were just analyzing earlier about Galant. So Galant, I got to get the accent for this syllable. Anyway, let's go to your article.
Yeah, which is exact. I just tweeted this morning, and it's on the same point, and the same point of what's going on in the Israeli left. Michael Hauser Tov, who is the son of a politician and is a propagandist.
Son of Tzvi Hauser?
Yeah, he's the son of Tzvi Hauser, which is a former Netanyahu ally and a Netanyahu enemy.
How did he get the Tov in his name?
I don't know, but he became a journalist in Galatz, the army radio, which is the hotbed for preparing the new cadres of the journalistic left. And he's been caught making ethical, I don't know, I don't have it's not, crime is not the word, but breach of journalistic ethics in very, very serious ways. He accused Netanyahu when the government was passed on to Naftali Bennett a few years back. He accused Netanyahu of burning state papers in order not to give them to Naftali Bennett, and the story was a sham. And then he tried to prop it up, nevertheless, with some recording of Tzachi Braverman, which is Netanyahu's chief of staff, and Tzachi Braverman was talking about his own documents that he took from the office, and he took 4.5 seconds out of that and put it and quoted that as if his story was right. So he has a very, very bad reputation in Israel. And just this morning he covered a demonstration outside Netanyahu's home, saying that Netanyahu is repeatedly attempting to sabotage a deal to return the hostages. And this, as you mentioned in the news in the beginning of this show, this is their constant line. The people who want to end the war in a hostage deal keep saying that Netanyahu, for personal reasons, is sabotaging a deal, while Israelis all know that what Netanyahu is insisting on is our most vital interest. And why am I mentioning all this? Because the left constantly mistakes its own echo chamber for Israel, since it has such good control and almost hermetic control of the press. No longer as it used to, because now there's Channel 14, there's social media, but it still thinks that it dominates the narrative. But the thing is, it ends up believing its own narrative and misreading the Israeli public. And so repeatedly it convinces itself that now winning the war is returning the hostages. I don't know if you heard that slogan, but people on the right keep mocking that. Said, why are you saying that? You're telling Sinwar that if he wants victory over Israel, not to return the hostages. This is an idiotic thing to say. But they have managed to hypnotize themselves and convince themselves that the hostages are the only issue in this war, and that anyone with a heart would go for this reasonable end of the war, leaving Philadelphia corridor deal. But they keep misreading the Israeli public. Not all of them. So the thing in my article, which I guess is the hardest thing for people to digest, but you can hear them saying it. The real enemy is the Israeli right, not Hamas. We have actual quotes for that.
That's what I was saying with in the sanctions article. I didn't put it quite like that, but that's also what, maybe I did put it like that. I don't even remember how I said it, but that is also the view of the Biden administration. The Biden administration, when they sat and they said, what are our American aims in this war? It's to make sure they wanted to actually defeat the right, the Israeli right, but certainly make sure that the Israeli right does not get strengthened by this war. And that has been a major war aim from the beginning. And it's the number one thing that's wrong with American policy.
Absolutely. And the Israeli left in this is in cahoots with the American administration because both think that. So what I try to do in the article is explain how they see it, not just polemically argue against it, but to explain how they see it. And they think that Hamas and the Arabs in general are a manageable problem, that there have been wars, there will be wars, but the door for peace in the future is still open. And what creates an Israel that would be fanatical, deplorable, not to mention racist, homophobic, and all the rest, is the Israeli right. So what we have is a local version of post-nationalism. And these people are fighting for what they think is Zionism. And for them, Zionism is normalizing Jewish existence. Now I'm going to say something more complicated. Zionism is indeed about normalizing Jewish existence. But normality for the fathers of Zionism was not to be treated equally in your ski resort, in your wine tasting club, or on social media, or in a conference of cardiologists in Berlin. No, it was to be, as our Declaration of Independence says, like all peoples, masters of their own. It is the natural right of the Jewish people to be like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own sovereign states. That was normality for Zionism. It was preserving Judaism. And what happened with this elite is that any sign of Jewishness is for them the opposite of normality. Normality for them is transcending Judaism. And this is why I keep mentioning this quote by Irit Linu, which is so brilliant, in my opinion. Irit Linu is I think, our most far-sighted intellectual. And what she said about this is, they dream of Sweden in Hebrew. And any remnant of the Jewish narrative is like, pardon my Christian metaphor, a cross that we cannot bear to keep holding. And so we need to transcend Judaism. And for them, we the Jews, the right-wingers, the religious, the traditionalists, the conservatives, we are pulling them back into the murky swamp of Jewish particularism, which they have sought to transcend in the air-conditioned business lounges of foreign airports. And their dream is a globalist dream. And so they are in a constant state of fear, because demographically they're losing, and they're becoming a smaller minority. And this is why, Mike, on the unconceivable happened on the eve of October 7th. It was, remind you, the end of Sukkot. It was the eve of Simchat Torah. They were fighting against public Jewish prayers in Tel Aviv. That was their issue. They were desperately fighting against.
Oh, I forgot that. I remember that now. Yeah.
So there was one round in Yom Kippur, and then there was going to be a round about Simchat Torah, the last day of the reading of the Torah. And then on that day, October 7th, happened and threatened to drag them right back into the Jewish story, right? Because here you are. Your story of normality depends on peace. And there you have it with the Hamas refusing to cooperate with your globalist dreams. So they think that they can convince Hamas, or at least leave Hamas behind some border, but they're afraid they'll not be able to convince me, the right, the religious, the traditionalists, the conservatives, the Jews of Israel. So to quote Irit Linu once again, she said, if you want to know the difference between right and left in Israel, ask a person, who are you more afraid of, Arabs or Jews? If the answer is Jews, then you're on the right. So that was what I tried to explain, that their visceral fear, they're actually in existential hysteria, because their version of Zionism, which is a sort of thinly, only vaguely Jewish Zionism, is under threat, and their liberal utopia is going to be stolen by all these deplorables.
You made me realize in your description, you made me realize what I have in common with these people. We have the same view of heaven, because my view of heaven is the business class lounge of Turkish
Turkey.
Airlines in Istanbul. It is the greatest place on earth, better than anything else you can imagine. And that's how, when I die, I hope I go there and I sit and I will worship our Savior, Jesus Christ, while drinking some red wine and listening to the player piano.
So let me ask you this, Mike. Did you count the virgins in the business lounge of Turkish Airlines? If there are 72, chances are that you were right, and it is.
It's a multicultural heaven there. You know what? I have not gotten in the habit of counting virgins, but next time I'm there, I'll see if I can do it.
For all you Christian cares, there's one. But Muslims have a great advantage here. So we also wanted to attend to some of the comments that we got underneath our videos in the comment section.
Yeah, I can't deal with all of them, but so we had one guy on Rumble. There were a couple of very interesting ones. One guy wrote a very short, pithy comment.
But mention the guy by name or by handle.
Oh, I don't have it right here. Sorry, I just have it. I'm sorry.
So for next time. Yeah.
Anyway, he wrote "fuck Israel," and so I have two responses to this. My first response is actually I only have one response. I can't remember what my second response was. My response is thank you for your interest in national security. Have you subscribed to us? Because this is what we want more than anything. We really appreciate your interest in the show, but make sure you subscribe, because that's what allows us to reach a wider audience. There's a second one here. Also, again, I don't have the name, Gadi, but there's been a slew, actually, after I read one a few weeks ago in which they expressed a greater desire to hear from me than you. There's been a counter reaction.
Are these the only comments?
Wait, there's been a counter reaction, and there's one guy that says that you need a mute button so that you can mute me because I keep interrupting you. And I just let me respond to this. I'm a little bit dismayed by this, Gadi, because I mean, I thought you and I have known each other for years, no? And I thought, if you have a problem with me, I would think you would just raise it directly with me, that you would go this really, circuitous route, set up a fake account on Rumble and post these comments. It's insulting. I think it's hurtful. It's hurtful to me. I really.
Let me just mention that I do have a mute button and I can mute you. I just haven't used it. Also, according to foreign reports, Israel has nuclear weapons, but we don't know if that's true or not. In any case, Israel must have a mute button. That I know. So the dumbest take on the news, Mike. Shall I go first? Because as we were speaking,
you didn't respond to my. Why are you going on our videos and posting these comments like this? I mean, really.
Because Israelis are shy and polite and indirect. Yeah, I can't bear confrontation. Yeah. And so I was gonna have a long dumbest take on the news, but something came up as we were speaking, and it was just funny, by Noga Arbel, who was a researcher in the Kohelet Institute, which was blamed for supporting the reform, and she tweeted this. I have to say it in English. The estimation is increasingly verified that there was no Iranian attack last night. Iranian sources say, no, we did attack. Check your spam file. Check your spam file. So we may, by the time this show is aired, this may not be funny anymore, but for now it is. What is your dumbest take on the news, Mike?
My dumbest take was in Bloomberg Opinion, and I'm losing it here. I can't find it now. An opinion columnist in Bloomberg Opinion wrote that the selection of Tim Walz by Kamala Harris as her running mate is terrifying Republicans because of his masculinity. It's his hyper masculinity is terrifying Republicans. And I just wanted to say that I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified by the masculinity of Tim Walz.
You know, a lot of Republican female voters are terrified by democratic masculinity, especially in women's sport. but that's another issue. So we don't know if by the time we see you again, there will be a regional war or not. Mike, you want to say?
Make your prediction. What's your prediction
about the war?
Yeah, so you've been pretty good so far. You went off to an undisclosed location and said, "Don't worry about it." So
yeah,
right.
Well, I feel like the guy falling off a building and at floor 37 saying, "So far, so good." Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think they will have to do something. I don't think that we are facing a sudden huge bang. I think that if this continues to escalate, it will creep in. I don't think that Hezbollah will just now but I can't be surprised. If they send 5,000 rockets and kill 3,000 Israeli civilians, then all hell will break loose. And I don't think that this is their interest. So I'll add one rational element in this largely intuitive estimation. And this is, I've been thinking this from the beginning of the war, that Iran does not want to sacrifice Hezbollah before it completes its military nuclear program. This is the guardian of their program, and this is the deterrent against Israel, and they wouldn't want to lose it before they finish preparing their bombs.
Yeah, I don't think they want to lose it ever. The issue, though, is that Hezbollah has to do something, I think. And the problem is that the Israelis are on a hair trigger because of the number of rockets and missiles that Hezbollah has, but also because of the very short distance. I mean, we saw that in the Majd al-Shams attack, that the kids on the soccer field, the alarm went off, but they didn't have time to get to the shelter. With distances like that, the ability of some of the weapons to penetrate the defensive system and the lack of response time on the part of the Israelis means that the minute an escalation starts from Hezbollah, the Israelis are going to go all in. The Israelis are not going to, it's not going to be an incremental escalation. In order to actually gain the advantages that the Israelis want, the Israelis have to go all in. So it escalates. It goes from 0 to 60 very, very fast. That's why I think there's going to be a war.
If I can risk another guess, I think that not wanting it to go from 0 to 60 in one fell swoop, they may try to hit a military target, which is a different thing, or else a diplomatic target abroad. So they can try to do something flashy rather than damaging, which is still risks a severe Israeli response.
Yeah, my guess is they also would like to coordinate. I think they want to show their coordination capabilities. They also want to show that they have improved since the drone attacks on Israel, the drone and ballistic missile attacks on Israel that were unsuccessful. So I suspect, here's my prediction. We're going to have, I agree with what you're saying. They want to attack a military target also because they don't want to alienate the Americans completely. They want the Americans to believe that they're behaving responsibly within certain parameters. As strange as that sounds. So what they're going to do, or let's put it, they want international legitimacy for their action. So it's going to be a coordinated attack, Hezbollah and Iran, against a single Israeli military base, maybe an air base.
Wow. We're getting specific.
This is how I would. But if I were them, this is how I would square the circle that we're talking about.
But also note that they got a hint it was in your news bulletin too, that the Israeli security force said that if they act disproportionately, then so and so will happen. So everybody's leaving the door open for something called proportional, which is tricky, but certainly the Americans are, and maybe the Israelis are hinting in the same direction. Well, we'll have this is now on tape, and we will have to face the consequences, Mike. Face the music.
I'm ready. I'm
next
ready. I'm
time.
ready.
You're ready.
I like
You've done
making
this before.
predictions. Yeah, I like making predictions. I think it's a way to keep yourself honest.
Oh, do explain that. That's interesting.
Well, because people in my profession like to not make predictions so that they won't be wrong, but you can test how good
Yeah.
your ideas
Yeah,
are.
put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, you put your money where your mouth is. So I gave you my prediction. I'm quite willing to be wrong. It's happened in the past.
Ladies and gentlemen, you will be able to check us against our predictions next Tuesday. Thank you for being with us so far, and please subscribe to our channels on Rumble and on YouTube. We'll see you here in a week.